let's talk about the hold-in in Dallas. What is your reporting on the Joneses and the Parsonses and whether they've reached out to the agents, as Parsons, according to our friend Clarence Hill, asked the Joneses to do, and they still haven't really personally reached out to Micah's agent? How serious is this situation, Tom?
Well, the Cowboys are in a unique setup because normally you wouldn't want the owner to be calling the agent to get a deal done, but Jerry's also the GM. And so it's the logical person. If you're going to finalize a deal, you'd like him to call a very, high profile agent whose name Jerry claimed not to know several months ago. It just sounds like since they had that initial, what both sides have described as a handshake type of deal directly between Jerry and Micah several months ago, there just has not been a ton of progress. Why Jerry decides to go to the podium a few days ago and say, hey, he could get hit by a car. I honestly don't know. Every year there's about 10 to 12 bites from that press conference, whether he's talking about mosquitoes or using different analogies, whatever, that you walk away going, well, that was a strange thing to say in that moment, but that's part of the Cowboys experience. It's part of the Jerry experience. I would say this, Rich. We know exactly where these numbers should come in based upon Myles Garrett's at 40, TJ Watt's at 41. Mike has always been more likely to be above both of those, somewhere in that probably $43 to $45 million per year range. Now it's a matter of what does the structure look like on that deal. Cowboys historically have done strong upfront cash flow types of deals, but they also like longer deals where they buy up years on the back end whenever they get to talking. And I'm sure there are other members of the organization, the people who actually handle the nitty gritty of negotiations, have talked to David Mulugheta by this point. That's going to be one of the sticking points it has, which is, do you want to have a superstar player sign a 5 or 6 year deal and essentially sign away his prime? From the agent and the player's perspective, you'd rather do a shorter term deal, let's say 4 years, where you're getting another bite at the apple before you hit age 30. This should not be, in terms of just the raw numbers and what the deal should look like, it shouldn't be a tough deal to get done. We know, even though it took forever on Dak, it took a long time on CD, ultimately you got to the logical things, which were large portions guaranteed. They were shorter term deals, and that's because the players ultimately had the leverage. For Micah, the leverage for the team, if there is any, is, hey, ultimately you're going to have to choose. You're going to play out this year's deal. Then we can franchise tag you next year. We can go franchise tag you again. We can go 3 years out in this thing if we really want to, just like we did with Dak. The problem with that logic is, just like in all these other deals, by waiting, the Cowboys historically have ended up paying more. And while, again, I would maintain that the Micah number really hasn't changed because of recent events, including the TJ Watt deal, it's still a substantial amount. The cap's going to continue to grow, and the number is just going to go up.
And then we're always assuming, Tom, that whoever is holding out or in wants to reset the market. And that's potentially the reason why that player is not in camp right now. What's your knowledge about what Terry McLaurin and Trey Hendrickson are asking for? Are they trying to reset the market for those
Neither
positions?
one are trying to reset the market. They're both trying to get paid fairly relative to their production. And listen, both guys are right around age 30, which for a long time has been a scary number within the NFL. If you go back historically and you actually analyze the data, there are some positions where players can perform really well into their early or even mid-30s. There's other positions where you have kind of a precipitous drop-off. In both cases, it's kind of similar. For Terry McLaurin, he turns 30 years old in September, but he's coming off of 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons. If you look at his numbers are almost identical the past 5 years, other than last year he caught a whole boatload of touchdowns. And oh, by the way, this will be the first time, I believe, in his career that he's had the same week one starting quarterback 2 years in a row because of the constant turn in Washington. Before Jaden Daniels got there, I believe the quarterback who had started the most with Terry McLaurin was Taylor Heineke. So for McLaurin, you're watching all these other players get these big-time types of contracts. DK Metcalf, as part of a trade with the Steelers, ended up getting a monster type of deal. Obviously, Jamar Chase reset the top of the market. Terry McLaurin's not trying to get $35, $38, $40 million per year. However, he's due a little under $20 million this year. And the reality is, if he signed that deal several years ago, the $20 million a year player, even 3 years ago at the receiver position, is now a $30 million a year player. And for Terry McLaurin, look at these other deals, you're thinking I should be somewhere in the 30s just to bring it up to snuff. We know that he's in the Virginia area, in part because he was snapped in a photo outside a yoga class.
That's right.
So obviously he thinks there's a possibility that, hey, something can get done that would get him into the building. But my understanding has been all options are on the table at this point. He could ultimately end up requesting a trade. He could end up with the team working out a deal. He could even just show up and say, I'm going to play out the last year of my contract, or tack on some incentives. We've seen that at other times in recent years, and I'll just come in without a new long-term deal. There's a lot of different buttons that Terry McLaurin and his agent Buddy Baker could push. They've not yet pushed them. So while they're talking, as of this morning, Rich, it did not sound like there was any progress in terms of a long-term deal. So we'll continue to wait and see how that goes. With Trey Hendrickson, same thing. He's 30 years old. He has been the most productive pass rusher in terms of sacks over the last couple of years. He led the league in 2024. May not have the physical traits of some other guys, but you can't argue with the production. The issue in Cincinnati is not that he's trying to reset the market. He's not trying to get over $40 million per year or 41 to beat TJ Watt, even though TJ Watt's basically the same age. He's just trying to get paid in that same range, where you look at what Max Crosby got, which was upwards of 35. Danielle Hunter was in that same range earlier in the offseason. Obviously, Miles is at 40. It's going to be somewhere in that bandwidth. My understanding is when you had Bengals officials on Monday speaking very optimistically, Mike Brown, Duke Tobin, among others, talking about, we think we're going to get this done. There was real talk that potentially they could get something done, because in terms of the raw numbers, again, Rich, we know where this is going to land, right? The APY is what always gets the headlines, and it's the highest paid or whatever, but it's also about structure. The Bengals are one of only really two teams in the league at this point, along with Green Bay, that don't do future guarantees. They do the signing bonuses guaranteed and nothing else. Well, whether there was miscommunication or whatever, when ultimately Trey Hendrickson got another offer, it only once again had the first year guaranteed, not 2026, not 2027, only this year. Trey Hendrickson, from the time he showed up to a practice in May in a polo and khakis and said, I'm not playing on this year's deal, has made clear, what do you want? I want a multi-year commitment here. I want to be able to be committed to this team for the next couple of years here. The team has not been willing to do that, so Trey Hendrickson flew back to Florida on Monday night. We'll see when or if he ends up returning to Cincinnati. But it's a long-winded way of saying, Rich, no, neither of these guys is trying to reset the market. But anytime that you've got players who are as productive as Terry McLaurin and Trey Hendrickson have been, regardless of age, you're going to want to be in that top 5, top 10 type of category. Neither player is. Both players are trying to get there. Structure is an issue in the case of Trey Hendrickson. We'll see how long these go on, but I would say, Rich, sometimes as we get closer to the padded practices, that's when a year ago a couple of quarterback contracts got done. Sometimes you get closer to those padded practices that can't begin until this weekend. That's where maybe the sense of urgency starts to set in a little bit more for everybody involved.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.